The final stone settled into place with a soft, satisfying rasp against the earth. Mark knelt, his gloved hands pressing it firm, completing the low, serpentine wall that bordered the garden. It was a small wall, no more than 12 inches high, built from river stones he and Lily had collected over the past month. Each one was smooth, gray, and cool to the touch. Inside its gentle curve bloomed a quiet riot of Sarah's favorites: lavender, hydrangeas, and a cluster of white gardenias whose scent already hung sweet and heavy in the late afternoon air. This small patch of his own backyard, on his own private lot, was the only place he felt a semblance of peace anymore. It was a sanctuary built from grief, a living memorial to his wife, and a bridge back to his 10-year-old daughter. He watched Lily, who sat on the grass nearby, carefully sketching the garden in her notepad. A rare, genuine smile touched her lips. For the first time in 6 months, it felt like they were building something instead of just existing within the wreckage of what they'd lost. He stood, brushing the dirt from his jeans, and surveyed their work. It was tasteful, understated. As an architect, he was pathologically attuned to aesthetics and proportion. The garden was designed not to impose, but to blend, to offer a pocket of natural grace in the otherwise immaculate, surgically precise landscape of the willows at Northgate subdivision. Every lawn was a perfect emerald carpet, every ornamental shrub trimmed to the millimeter. Harmony through uniformity. That was the community's unofficial motto. As he turned to head inside, a flash of white on his front door caught his eye. It was a single sheet of paper, folded and tucked into the door handle, secured with a piece of tape. He felt a familiar, low-grade annoyance. Probably another flyer for a lawn service or a new pizza place. But as he drew closer, he saw the letterhead, visible through the fold, a tasteful willow tree logo above the words. The Willows at Northgate Homeowners Association. He pulled the paper free. It wasn't in an envelope. It was informal. Deliberately so. He unfolded it. A friendly reminder from your Architectural Control Committee, ACC. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that new landscaping construction has been undertaken at your property. As a gentle reminder, and to maintain the aesthetic harmony of our community, all exterior alterations, including but not limited to hardscaping, require prior approval from the ACC as outlined in our governing documents. We encourage you to submit an application at your earliest convenience to ensure your project aligns with community standards. We value your cooperation in keeping the Willows a beautiful place to live. Sincerely, your neighbors on the ACC. There was no signature, no specific violation cited, just a polite, sterile, and deeply unsettling message. It has come to our attention. He glanced up and down the street. Identical houses with identical mailboxes stood in silent judgment. Who had been watching? Whose attention had he come to? A cold knot formed in his stomach. The garden was not a project. It was a memory. The wall was not hardscaping. It was a border for his wife's flowers. The idea of submitting this intensely personal act for the approval of a faceless committee felt like a profanation. He looked back at Lily, still sketching, blissfully unaware of the intrusion. This garden was for her, for them. It was on his property, 100 feet from the curb, invisible to anyone not actively peering over his fence. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. It was just a reminder. He told himself, a bureaucratic formality. He would ignore it. It was a mistake to think that something so small, so personal, could possibly matter to anyone else. It was a mistake he would come to regret. The note was not a reminder. It was an opening salvo, And, in the willows at Northgate, every conflict, no matter how small, was fought by the book. Carol Shepard, the HOA board president, had written that book, and she made sure everyone else read it. The next few days passed in a quiet, deceptive calm. Mark tried to push the notice from his mind, focusing instead on his work, a freelance design project for a small commercial building downtown. He was a good architect, known for his clean lines and meticulous attention to detail. His professional life was a world of blueprints, building codes, and precise measurements, a comforting logic he found increasingly absent in his personal life since Sarah's death. The garden was his only concession to something less structured, something that grew from feeling rather than function. Lily was the center of his universe now, a quiet, observant child with her mother's artistic talent. She had retreated into herself after the accident. The garden project had been the first thing to draw her out. She'd helped him choose the stones, arrange the flowers, and water the new plantings. It was their shared space, a place where they could talk about her mom without the crushing weight of the empty house around them. On Wednesday morning, Mark walked with Lily to the community mailbox kiosk at the end of the block. It was a small, brick structure, the designated social hub of the cul-de-sac. As he unlocked his mailbox, a voice, as smooth and sharp as polished granite, cut through the morning air. "Good morning, Mark." He turned. Carol Shepard stood there, holding a small stack of her own mail. She was a woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a crisp linen pantsuit, her blonde hair sculpted into a helmet of immovable perfection. She was the 5-term president of the HOA board, a position she wielded with the strategic precision of a 4-star general. Her smile was a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry, wide and bright and utterly devoid of warmth. "Carol," he replied, giving a slight, neighborly nod. "Morning." "I'm so glad I ran into you," she said, her eyes flicking for a split second toward his house before returning to his face. "I do hope you received our little note. Just a formality. You understand? We're trying to be more proactive this year, helping homeowners avoid any misunderstandings." The word hung in the air between them. Misunderstandings. "I got it," Mark said, keeping his tone even. "It's just a small flower bed in the backyard. I didn't think an application was necessary for something like that." Carol's smile tightened by a fraction of a millimeter. "Oh, it's always necessary. The CC&Rs are quite clear. No construction, alteration, or removal of any building, fence, wall, or other structure shall be commenced without the prior written approval of the Architectural Control Committee. We have to be consistent. Uniformity is what maintains our property values. After all," she tapped a perfectly manicured nail on her stack of letters, "it's a lovely thought. A memorial garden, truly. But it's the structure we're concerned with. The stone border. Just submit the form. Mark, I'm sure we can get it approved retroactively. It's just paperwork." She gave him a final, blinding smile and walked away, her heels clicking a sharp, authoritative rhythm on the pavement. The encounter left a bitter taste in his mouth. It wasn't a neighborly chat. It was a warning, a velvet-gloved command. Later that evening, after Lily was in bed, Mark pulled out the thick, 3-ring binder he'd been given at closing, the governing documents of the Willows at Northgate. He blew a thin layer of dust off the cover and opened it. For the next 2 hours, he read through the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC&Rs. It was a dense, labyrinthine document filled with legalese, a homeowner's Bible written by lawyers. He found the section Carol had loosely quoted. It was broad, but seemed geared toward major changes: fences, sheds, patios. Then he found the article the courtesy notice had likely been based on. The catch-all clause he would come to know intimately. Your 8.4.2. Aesthetic harmony. All lots, whether vacant or occupied, and all improvements thereon shall be maintained in a manner consistent with the aesthetic harmony and overall uniform appearance of the community. The determination of what constitutes aesthetic harmony shall be at the sole and absolute discretion of the Architectural Control Committee. There it was, a clause so vague, so subjective. It could mean anything they wanted it to mean. It was a blank check for administrative overreach. His architect's mind rebelled against the lack of specificity. How could anyone design or build anything with confidence under such a nebulous rule? His phone buzzed. It was a text from his neighbor across the street, Dave Miller. Dave was a retired electrician who had lived in the neighborhood since the first foundations were poured 20 years ago. Dave saw, "Carol, corner you at the mailboxes. Everything okay?" Mark, "Just a friendly chat about my garden." Dave, "There's no such thing as a friendly chat with Carol about the HOA. Watch your back with her. She collects violations like they're trading cards. Let me know if you need anything." Mark stared at the text. Dave was a good man, pragmatic and level-headed. His warning confirmed the feeling of unease that had been growing since the note appeared on his door. This wasn't about a few stones in his backyard. This was about something else entirely. He just didn't know what yet. He closed the binder, the words "sole" and "absolute discretion" echoing in his mind. The battle lines were being drawn, not in the dirt of his garden, but in the fine print of a contract he had signed without ever truly understanding its power. 2 days later, the mail carrier didn't just drop the letters through the slot. There was a sharp rap on the door. Mark opened it to find the mailman holding a clipboard and a slim, green and white envelope. "Certified letter for Mark Jansen," he said, his expression neutral. "Need a signature right here." Mark's heart gave a dull, heavy thud. He knew, with absolute certainty, what it was. Certified mail was the HOA's version of a formal declaration of war. It was a legally verifiable method of delivery, the first step in creating a paper trail that could eventually lead to fines and liens. His brief hope that Carol would let the matter drop after their chat at the mailboxes evaporated. He signed the electronic pad, his hand steady, despite the sudden coldness in his veins. The mailman handed him the letter and continued on his route. Mark closed the door, the envelope feeling unnaturally heavy in his hand. The return address was not the HOA itself, but a corporate-sounding entity, Prestige Community Management, Inc., the management company, the hired guns. He sat down at his dining room table, the same table where he and Sarah used to help Lily with her homework. He slit the envelope open with a letter opener, the crisp tear of the paper sounding loud in the quiet house. Inside was a single sheet of heavy bond paper, bearing the same willow tree logo as the first note. But this time, the language was stripped of all pretense of friendliness. Formal notice of violation. Date, current date, property address, 124, Willow Creek Lane, homeowner, Mark Jansen, sent via U.S. certified mail. Dear Mr. Jansen, this letter serves as a formal notice of a violation of the governing documents of the Willows at Northgate Homeowners Association. An inspection of your property on date 3 days prior revealed the installation of an unapproved hardscape structure stone border wall in your rear yard. This is in direct violation of the following provisions of the recorded covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs. Article 5, Section 5.1, Architectural Control Committee approval required. Article the 8, Section 8.4.2, Maintenance of aesthetic harmony. The nature of the violation is the failure to obtain prior written approval from the Architectural Control Committee (ACC) for the construction of said structure. Corrective action required. You are required to completely remove the unapproved stone border wall. Deadline for compliance. The structure must be removed within 14 calendar days from the date of this notice. The deadline for compliance is date 2 weeks from now. Failure to comply by the specified deadline will result in this matter being referred to the Board of Directors for a formal hearing. Should the violation be upheld at the hearing, the Board is authorized to levy monetary fines, beginning at $100 per day, until the property is brought into full compliance. All associated legal and administrative costs may also be assessed to your homeowner account. We trust this clarifies the matter and look forward to your prompt compliance. Sincerely, the Board of Directors, CO Prestige Community Management, Inc. Mark read the letter twice, then a third time. The cold, impersonal language was a deliberate tool of intimidation. Inspection of your property. So someone had been snooping. Direct violation. Corrective action required. Monetary fines. The clock was now officially ticking. 14 days. 14 days to dismantle the one thing that had brought him and his daughter a measure of comfort. He looked out the window at the garden. The afternoon sun lit up the lavender, making it glow. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. And now, it was a violation. He felt a surge of anger, hot and clean. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a direct assault on his home, his privacy, and the memory of his wife. Carol Shepard and her anonymous board had picked a fight. They assumed he would be like most homeowners, intimidated by the official letterhead, cowed by the threat of fines, and ultimately compliant. They didn't know him. They didn't know that an architect's entire career is built on understanding rules, structures, and systems. And when a system was being abused, his instinct wasn't to surrender. It was to deconstruct it, find its flaws, and expose its weaknesses. He picked up his phone and dialed Dave's number. Dave, it's Mark. The certified letter just arrived. It's exactly what you thought it would be. There was a weary sigh on the other end of the line. Okay, son, don't do anything rash. The game has begun. Now we have to play it by their rules, so we can beat them with their own rulebook. The fight for a small garden of river stones and memories had officially begun. Mark spent the next 2 days preparing. Following Dave's advice, he drafted a polite but firm letter to the management company, formally disputing the violation. He argued that the low stone border was de minimis landscaping, not a structure in the sense intended by the CC&Rs, and requested a copy of the ACC's architectural standards or guidelines that specifically define such structures. He also requested an informal meeting with the ACC to discuss the matter before it escalated to a formal hearing. He was offering an olive branch, a chance for reasonable discussion. The response came via email less than 24 hours later. The meeting was granted. It was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the offices of Prestige Community Management. The office was located in a sterile suburban business park, a soul-crushing landscape of beige stucco and reflective glass. The conference room was equally bland along, polished table, uncomfortable chairs, and fluorescent lighting that cast a sickly pallor on everyone. Mark sat on one side of the table. On the other sat Carol Shepard, flanked by 2 other board members, a stern-looking man named Gary and an older woman, Mrs. Peterson, who looked deeply uncomfortable and a slick, tired-looking man in his 30s named Todd, the official representative from Prestige Management. Carol opened the meeting with a smile that was all sharp edges. "Thank you for coming in. Mark, We always appreciate it when homeowners are willing to engage in a productive dialogue. Todd, the manager, cleared his throat and shuffled some papers. So, Mr. Jansen, we have your letter. The board has reviewed it, and while we appreciate your position, the violation stands. The purpose of this meeting is simply to clarify the board's position and the steps required for you to achieve compliance. Mark placed his hands on the table. He had decided on a strategy of calm, methodical reason. I appreciate that. He began. My main question is one of definition. The CC&Rs are for fences, walls, or other structures. A 12-inch high, unmortared stone border for a flower bed doesn't seem to fit that description. I was hoping you could provide the written architectural standard that the ACC uses to make these determinations. Carol leaned forward, her smile unwavering. The standard, Mark, is the collective judgment of the committee, as guided by the documents. As you know, Section 8.4.2 grants the ACC sole and absolute discretion to determine what constitutes aesthetic harmony. In our judgment, the introduction of a large quantity of fieldstone, which is not an approved material in our community's design palette, detracts from that harmony. Fieldstone isn't an approved material, Mark asked, genuinely surprised. Where is that written? I've read the architectural guidelines. They specify roofing materials, paint colors, fence types. There is no mention of landscaping stone. Gary, the other board member, spoke for the first time, his voice a low grumble. It's not about a specific list. It's about the overall look. We have brick and slate. We don't have river rock. Furthermore, Carol added smoothly, cutting off any further discussion on that point, the rule you're referring to, about prior approval for structures, is absolute. Its size is irrelevant. The fact is, it was built without an application. The violation is procedural as well as aesthetic. I understand that, Mark said, keeping his frustration in check, which is why I'm willing to submit a retroactive application, if we can just agree on a clear, documented standard that my garden is supposedly violating. This was the crux of it. He was trying to pin them down to a specific, written rule, something he could argue against logically. Carol, he realized, was determined to keep the argument in the realm of the subjective, where the board's power was absolute. The committee's interpretation is final, she said, her voice hardening slightly. We are not required to debate our interpretations with homeowners. We are volunteers. Mark, giving our time to protect everyone's investment. This constant questioning undermines the process. Mrs. Peterson shifted in her seat, looking down at her clasped hands. She seemed to be the only one in the room with a flicker of doubt. Mark tried one last time. In the interest of transparency, could you at least provide me with the minutes from the ACC meeting where my property was discussed, and this view corridor, or aesthetic harmony rule was applied? I think it would help me understand the committee's reasoning. The term view corridor was something he'd heard Dave mention as a tactic Carol had used before. He threw it in to see if it would stick. Todd, the manager, quickly intervened. Board and committee minutes are internal documents. We are not obligated to provide them in a dispute of this nature. That was it. They had shut down every avenue of reasonable inquiry. They weren't interested in discussion. They were interested in compliance. The meeting was a sham, a box to be checked in the due process sequence before they could move on to the next step. Carol gave a decisive nod. Well, I think that's been very productive. Since you are unwilling to comply, we have no choice but to proceed to the next stage. Todd, please schedule Mr. Jansen's formal hearing with the board. Todd made a note. You'll receive a notice of hearing via certified mail within 5 business days. Mr. Jansen, it will specify the date and time. The hearing will likely be in about 2 weeks. Carol stood, signaling the end of the meeting. We're sorry it has come to this. Mark, all you had to do was remove the stones. As he walked out of the sterile office and into the blinding afternoon sun, Mark felt a cold fury settle over him. The olive branch had been slapped away. They had made it clear that facts, reason, and precedent did not matter. All that mattered was their power. He got into his car, the injustice of it burning in his chest. They had left him with no other option. He was done playing defense. It was time to start his own investigation. The formal notice of hearing arrived, as promised, 5 days later. It was scheduled for the evening of the annual HOA meeting, 3 weeks away. This, Dave explained over the phone, was a classic Carol Shepard power move. Holding the hearing during a public forum meant maximum potential for public humiliation. She expected him to either fold before the date or be made an example of in front of the entire community. Mark's grief, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket for months, was slowly being burned away by a new, clarifying fire. He channeled his energy into a methodical, painstaking investigation, approaching the problem as he would any complex architectural project, by gathering data and examining the foundational structure. His first call was back to Dave, who connected him with Anna Kowalski. Anna was a retired title clerk from the county recorder's office, a woman in her late 60s with a mind as sharp as a surveyor's tack and a deep, abiding passion for untangling bureaucratic knots. They met for coffee at a local diner. So, the HOA is citing a vague aesthetic clause and refusing to show you the minutes where they made the decision, Anna said after Mark laid out the story. She took a sip of her black coffee. Standard procedure for a board running on ego instead of bylaws. They're counting on you not knowing how to get the information yourself. So how do I get it? Mark asked. First, you need to understand the hierarchy of power, Anna explained, sketching on a napkin. At the very top is state law. Then comes the recorded plat map and your deed. Those are filed with the county and are legally binding. Below that are the HOA's governing documents, CC&Rs, bylaws, rules, and at the very bottom is a board's arbitrary interpretation of those documents. Your goal is to use the top of the pyramid to dismantle the bottom. She gave him a precise list. He needed certified copies of his property deed and, most importantly, the original subdivision plat map filed with the county when the Willows was first developed, not the glossy marketing map the developer gives you. She stressed, the official, recorded plat map. It will show every lot line, every utility easement, every right-of-way, down to the inch. It's the legal blueprint of your entire neighborhood. If this view corridor they might be dreaming up isn't on that map, it doesn't legally exist. Next, she told him how to get the board minutes. You have a right to inspect the association's records. Send a formal, written request via certified mail. Citing the relevant state statute, I'll give you the number. They can charge you for copies. And they might redact information about personnel or pending litigation. But they can't just deny you wholesale, if the redactions are excessive. That itself is evidence of bad faith. For the next 2 weeks, Mark's evenings were consumed by the hunt. He spent hours at the county recorder's office, a cavernous, dusty building downtown. He learned to navigate the arcane filing systems, scrolling through microfiche and pulling enormous, heavy books of property records. He found the original plat map for the Willows at Northgate, Section 3, and ordered 3 certified copies. He did the same for his deed, and, on a hunch, for Carol Shepard's deed at 112 Willow Creek Lane. He sent the formal request for 10 years of board and ACC meeting minutes. citing the state code Anna had given him. A week later, he received a thick manila envelope from Prestige Management. Inside were hundreds of pages. But as he began to read, his frustration grew. The minutes were riddled with black rectangles, the digital equivalent of a censor's pen. Entire paragraphs and pages from ACC meetings around the date his garden was first noticed were completely redacted. The minutes from the board meeting where they likely approved the violation notice against him were similarly blacked out, with the official reason cited as discussion of matters in executive session. It was a blatant attempt to stonewall him, but it was also a critical mistake on their part. The redactions were a map pointing directly to what they were trying to hide. He scanned the documents and sent a copy to Anna. He spent his days on his architectural work and his afternoons with Lily in the garden, which he refused to touch. The lavender was now in full bloom, a sea of fragrant purple. Lily seemed to sense the tension, but he did his best to shield her from it, explaining that there was a disagreement with the neighborhood committee that he was working to resolve. "Are they going to make us take the garden out?" "Daddy," she asked one evening, her voice small. Mark put his arm around her. "No," he said, with a conviction he didn't entirely feel. "I'm not going to let them. This is our home. This is Mom's garden, and we're going to protect it." The promise to his daughter solidified his resolve. This was no longer just about his rights. It was about defending his family's small corner of peace against a senseless, bureaucratic assault. He had the plat maps, the deeds, and the heavily redacted minutes. The pieces of the puzzle were on the table. He just needed the one that would connect them all. The call from Anna came on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 1 week before the annual meeting. Mark was at his drafting table, trying to solve a tricky HVAC routing problem. But his mind was on the hearing. "Mark, it's Anna. Are you sitting down?" "I am now," he said, his stomach tightening. "What did you find?" "I've been cross-referencing the plat map with the deeds you sent over, specifically looking for any mention of easements, restrictions, or special conditions. As I told you before, your property lot 84 is clean. There are standard utility easements along the back fence line, but absolutely nothing about a view corridor or aesthetic restriction anywhere near your garden. Legally speaking, they don't have a leg to stand on." Mark felt a wave of relief. "That's great news. Anna, that's everything I need." "No, it's not," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "That's the defense. I just found your offense. I took a look at Carol Shepard's property lot 72. It's a corner lot, which often have more restrictions, and hers is a doozy. According to the original plat map, there is a 10-foot wide public utility and view easement running along the entire side of her property that abuts the secondary street." Mark was already pulling up the digital copy of the plat map on his computer monitor. He located lot 72. There, it was a dotted line with the clear notation 10Z, PU, and VE. "A view easement," Mark breathed, his eyes tracing the line. "What does that mean?" "Exactly. It means that strip of her private property must be kept clear of any structures or significant landscaping to preserve the open view from the street for safety and aesthetics," Anna explained. "It's common on corner lots to prevent people from building high fences or sheds that would block the line of sight for drivers. It's a legally binding restriction recorded on the plat and almost certainly referenced in her deed." A memory surfaced in Mark's mind. A picture from the community newsletter last summer, congratulating Carol on winning the Golden Trowel Award for her beautiful backyard. He remembered the photo. It showed Carol, beaming, standing on an expansive, newly built flagstone patio, complete with a large, built-in brick barbecue island and a tall, decorative trellis. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He navigated to the HOA's website, found the archive of old newsletters, and opened the PDF from last July. There was the photo. He zoomed in. The beautiful new patio, the barbecue, the trellis, they were all located on the side of her house, directly within the 10-foot view easement. "Anna," he said slowly, a sense of dawning clarity washing over him. "I think our esteemed board president has an unapproved, and likely illegal, structure of her own, a rather large one." "Well, now," Anna said, her voice rich with satisfaction. "Isn't that interesting? Check her property file at the city's building department. See if a permit was ever pulled for that patio. My guess is it wasn't, because a permit review would have flagged the easement violation immediately." The fight was no longer just defensive. The board president, the self-appointed guardian of rules and aesthetic harmony, was a hypocrite. She was enforcing a subjective, unwritten rule against his small, memorial garden while actively violating a clear, legally recorded restriction on her own property. He now had leverage. This wasn't just a shield. It was a sword, a precisely forged, perfectly documented sword. He wasn't just going to defend his garden. He was going to expose the rot at the heart of the board's leadership. His strategy for the hearing changed instantly. It wouldn't be a plea for understanding. It would be a clinical, methodical presentation of fact, and he would deliver it in a public forum, where the truth would be undeniable. Carol must have sensed the shift in the wind. Perhaps it was Mark's silence, his refusal to engage further after the disastrous meeting. A compliant homeowner would be pleading or negotiating. A defiant one would be sending angry emails. Mark's methodical quiet seemed to unnerve her. With the annual meeting and his hearing just over a week away, she escalated her campaign from bureaucratic procedure to personal harassment. It began with small things, a series of microaggressions designed to fray his nerves and test his composure. An anonymous complaint was filed with Prestige Management about his trash cans. He received a courtesy notice stating that his bins had been left at the curb until 9:05 a.m. on trash day, 5 minutes past the 9:00 a.m. deadline stipulated in the community rules. It was petty, absurd, and clearly targeted. A few days later, Lily came home from playing outside, her eyes welling with tears. Carol had stopped her on the sidewalk and chided her for riding her scooter in a reckless manner on the common area sidewalk, warning her that she could be fined for property damage. Lily had just been riding in a slow circle. It was a cruel, calculated move, using his daughter to get to him. Mark's anger, which had been a cold, controlled burn, now flared with protective rage. He comforted Lily, reassuring her she had done nothing wrong. But the incident crossed a line. The final blow came 4 days before the hearing. Another certified letter from Prestige Management arrived. This one was titled Final Notice Before Hearing and Imposition of Fines. It was a masterpiece of intimidation. It restated the original violation in stark terms. It then detailed the fine schedule, $100 per day, retroactive to the original compliance deadline that would be imposed immediately should the board uphold the violation at the hearing. It included a ledger, already showing a potential balance of over $1,500. The last paragraph was the real threat. Please be advised that pursuant to the CC&Rs and state law, any unpaid fines, assessments, or related fees constitute a continuing lien upon the property against which such assessment is made. The association will not hesitate to take all necessary legal steps to perfect a lien on your property and to pursue foreclosure should the delinquency remain uncured. Foreclosure. The word was a cannon shot, designed to terrify any homeowner into immediate submission. They were threatening to take his house, the house he had shared with Sarah. the house he was raising his daughter in over a dozen riverstones. Mark felt the pressure mounting. He was sleeping less, the stress a constant, heavy weight in his chest. He reread the letter, his architect's eye catching the careful, lawyer-approved wording. "We will not hesitate." It was meant to make him feel isolated and powerless. That evening, as he was staring out at the garden, his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Jansen, this is Eleanor Peterson." It took him a moment to place the name. Mrs. Peterson, the quiet, uncomfortable-looking woman from the board meeting. "Mrs. Peterson," he said. "Surprised?" "Hello." "I hope you don't mind me calling," she said, her voice frail but clear. "I got your number from the community directory. I wanted to talk to you before the meeting on Thursday." "Okay," Mark said, uncertain where this was going. "I know what Carol is doing," she said quietly. "She is a very determined woman. She believes she is doing what is best for the neighborhood. But sometimes her methods are severe." There was a pause. "Last year, I received a violation notice for my bird bath. She said it was not in keeping with the character of the community. They fined me for 2 weeks before I finally gave in and had my son move it to storage. It caused me a great deal of distress." Mark was stunned. "A bird bath? I'm so sorry to hear that. Mrs. Peterson, I'm telling you this because I want you to know that you are not wrong to fight this," she continued. "But I also want you to be careful. She does not like to be challenged, especially not in public. She will see it as a personal attack." "I have no intention of attacking anyone personally," Mark said carefully. "I only intend to present the facts as they are written in the governing documents and the county records." "That may be the wisest course," Mrs. Peterson said. "I just wanted to, well, I wanted to wish you luck. Not everyone on the board agrees with this course of action, but we are often outvoted." The call ended, leaving Mark with a complex mix of feelings. He was grateful for her quiet support, but her story also presented him with a dilemma. He now had a witness to Carol's pattern of predatory enforcement. He could use Mrs. Peterson's story about the bird bath at the hearing to show a history of abuse of power. It would be a powerful, emotional blow against Carol's credibility. But it would also mean dragging this kind, elderly woman and her painful experience into the public spotlight, using her personal distress as a weapon in his own fight. He had the facts on his side, the plat map, the minutes, Carol's own violation. Was that enough, or did he need to use every weapon at his disposal, even if it meant causing collateral damage? His resolve was being tested not just by Carol's aggression, but by his own conscience. Winning was no longer the only goal. How he won mattered just as much. The Willows at Northgate Community Clubhouse was a monument to beige. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige folding chairs, arranged in neat, sterile rows. At the front of the room, the 5 members of the board of directors sat behind a long folding table, draped in a beige cloth. Carol Shepard, in the center, looked regal and composed in a navy blue blazer, presiding over the annual meeting with brisk efficiency. To her right sat the property manager, Todd, his laptop open, ready to record the minutes. A large digital projector screen hung behind the board, currently displaying the meeting agenda. In the top right corner of the screen, a digital clock was counting down from 30 through 0, the time allotted for the homeowner open forum. Mark sat in the third row, a slim leather portfolio resting on his lap. He felt a cold, steady calm. He had spent the last 48 hours rehearsing, timing his presentation down to the second. The open forum began. A homeowner stood up to complain about the pool hours. Carol thanked him for his input and noted that the pool committee would take it under advisement. Another resident asked about the rising annual dues. Gary, the treasurer, gave a brusque, jargon-filled answer about reserve funds and insurance premiums. Each speaker was held to a strict 3-minute limit, enforced by an audible beep from Todd's laptop. It was a well-oiled machine for managing and deflecting dissent. Finally, Carol looked at her agenda. Next, we have the scheduled hearing for the violation at 124 Willow Creek Lane. Mr. Jansen, you have 5 minutes to address the board, after which the board will deliberate and vote. All heads turned toward him. The air in the room grew thick with anticipation. Mark stood and walked to the podium at the front, his footsteps unnervingly loud in the sudden silence. He placed his portfolio on the lectern and looked directly at the board. Then, let his gaze sweep across the 30 or so homeowners in attendance. "Good evening, members of the board and neighbors," he began, his voice even and clear. The digital clock on the screen reset to 5 sur-heures and began its inexorable countdown. "My name is Mark Jansen. I'm here tonight regarding Violation Notice 2023-017, which demands the removal of a small stone border around a memorial garden in my backyard. The board has cited a failure to get prior approval and a violation of Section 8.4.2, the Aesthetic Harmony Clause." He opened his portfolio. 435. I would like to present 3 exhibits tonight to argue for the dismissal of this violation. Todd, could you please display Exhibit A on the projector? He handed Todd a USB drive. A high-resolution image of a plat map appeared on the screen. It was the certified copy from the county recorder's office. "This is the official, recorded plat map for our subdivision. My property is Lot 84, which I've highlighted here in yellow. As you can see, my lot is subject to standard utility easements at the property lines. However, as this legally binding document confirms, there are no view corridor easements, aesthetic restrictions, or any other encumbrances on my property that would limit my right to install a simple landscape feature in my own backyard. The board's claim of a violation lacks any legal basis in the foundational documents of our community." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Carol's smile was frozen in place. Now for Exhibit B. The image on the screen changed to a side-by-side comparison of 2 documents. On the left was a page from the ACC minutes provided by the management company, with large sections blacked out. On the right was the same page, but unredacted. The board has argued that its interpretation of aesthetic harmony is at its sole discretion. However, that discretion must still be exercised through proper procedure. When I requested the minutes related to this decision, I was provided with this heavily redacted version. I have since obtained an unredacted copy through a former board member who believes in transparency. His eyes met Mrs. Peterson's for a fleeting second. She gave him the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. As the unredacted version clearly shows, no formal vote was ever taken to interpret Section 8.4.2 as applying to unmortared landscape borders. There was no discussion of fieldstone as a prohibited material. In fact, there was no official deliberation at all. This violation was issued not based on a consistent, voted-upon rule, but apparently on a whim. This is not due process. It is arbitrary enforcement. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. Gary was scowling. Carol sat rigid, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the table. Mark paused. This was the moment. He could bring up the birdbath. He could tell Mrs. Peterson's story and frame Carol as a bully who preys on the vulnerable. He saw the flicker of anxiety in Mrs. Peterson's eyes as she watched him. And his decision was made. He would win on the merits of his own case. not on the pain of another's. He would not become the thing he was fighting against. Finally, I would like to talk about the principle of uniform and fair enforcement, which is the cornerstone of any functional homeowners association. Todd, please display Exhibit C. The image switched back to the plat map. This time, a different lot was highlighted in red. Lot 72, Carol Shepard's property. This is Lot 72, which, as a corner lot, is subject to a 10-foot public utility and view easement, clearly marked on the map. This easement must be kept clear of structures to ensure safety and aesthetic consistency. The image changed again, showing a crisp, clear aerial photograph of Carol's house, taken from the county's public GIS website. A bright red line was drawn over the image, marking the exact location of the 10-foot easement: a large flagstone patio, a brick barbecue island, and a tall trellis sat squarely inside the red line. A collective gasp went through the room. It was undeniable. "I am not here tonight to file a complaint," Mark said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. "I am merely presenting a documented fact. The board is seeking to find my family and lien my home for a dozen stones in my backyard, citing a vague, unwritten rule, while the president of the board herself is in clear violation of a legally recorded, foundational covenant of our community with a major, unapproved structure." He turned his gaze from the screen and looked directly at Carol. "My question for the board is this: how can you claim to be acting in the interest of aesthetic harmony and uniform enforcement when such a stark and demonstrable double standard exists? Enforcing the rules on others while ignoring them for yourself is not leadership. It is hypocrisy." He gathered his papers, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "I ask that you dismiss this violation, not just because it is baseless, but as a first step toward restoring faith in a fair and transparent process for all homeowners in this community. Thank you for your time." The clock beeped 0:00. Mark walked calmly back to his seat. The room was utterly, profoundly silent. The silence in the clubhouse was a physical presence, thick and heavy. Every eye was fixed on the board, on Carol Shepard, whose polished composure had finally cracked. A flush of deep, mottled red crept up her neck, a stark contrast to her pale face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was Mrs. Peterson who broke the spell. She leaned forward toward her microphone, her movements slow but deliberate. "Point of order, Madam President," she said, her voice surprisingly firm and carrying through the hushed room. Carol blinked, turning to her as if seeing her for the first time. "What is it?" "Eleanor," she managed, her voice strained. "I believe Mr. Jansen has presented compelling, documented evidence," Mrs. Peterson stated, looking not at Carol, but at the other board members and the audience. "Evidence that suggests this violation was issued improperly and that our enforcement has been, at best, inconsistent. Therefore, I would like to make a motion." She took a breath, straightening her shoulders. "I move to immediately dismiss violation 2023-017 against Mr. Jansen, with prejudice, and to waive any and all associated fees or fines." Before Carol could respond, a board member at the far end of the table, a man who had been silent all evening, seconded the motion. Seconded. The room erupted. Homeowners, previously cowed into silence, began talking at once. "She's right. That's a huge patio," someone from the back called out. "What about my fine for my satellite dish last year?" another voice demanded. "We need to see all the unredacted minutes." Carol banged a small gavel on the table, the sound tinny and ineffective against the rising tide of dissent. "Order. This is not. There is a process." But her authority, built on a foundation of opaque rules and intimidation, had crumbled under the bright, clear light of documented facts. The management company representative, Todd, was typing furiously on his laptop, his face a mask of professional neutrality. But his eyes darted around the room, assessing the undeniable shift in power. He was not here to defend Carol. He was here to protect his company from liability. He knew a losing battle when he saw one. Mrs. Peterson was not finished. "I would also like to make a second motion," she announced, her voice gaining strength. "I move that the board form an ad hoc committee, to be chaired by a non-board member, to conduct a full audit of all architectural and compliance decisions made in the last 2 years, to ensure that our governing documents have been applied fairly and uniformly to all residents, including members of the board." "Second," Dave Miller's voice boomed from the back of the room. Carol looked trapped. She was legally obligated to call a vote on the motions. Her face was a storm of fury and humiliation. She looked at Gary, her staunchest ally. But even he was looking down at the table, refusing to meet her gaze. The evidence was too clear, the public sentiment too strong. "All in favor of the first motion, to dismiss the violation against Mr. Jansen," she mumbled. Mrs. Peterson's hand shot up, followed by 2 others. Gary and Carol abstained. The motion passed, 3-0-2. A smattering of applause broke out in the audience. "The motion carries." Carol choked out. "All in favor of the second motion, to form an audit committee." Again, the same 3 hands went up. The motion passed. The rest of the meeting was a formality. Carol's control was broken. The carefully constructed edifice of her power, built over years of meticulous rule-mongering, had been dismantled in 5 minutes with 3 pieces of paper. Mark didn't feel a sense of triumph, only a quiet, weary relief. He had protected his home. He had defended his wife's memory. As the meeting adjourned and people began to file out, several neighbors stopped by his chair to shake his hand or give him a quiet word of thanks. Dave clapped him on the shoulder. "You did it, son. You didn't just win. You changed the whole game." Mark looked across the room at the board's table. Carol was gathering her papers, her movements stiff and jerky. Her mask of authority was gone, and for a brief moment, he saw her as she was a small, deeply insecure person, terrified of losing the petty kingdom she had built for herself. He felt a fleeting, unexpected pang of pity. Then it was gone, replaced by the simple, profound desire to go home. In the week that followed the annual meeting, the revolution in the Willows at Northgate was quiet but swift. An email from Prestige Management informed the community that Carol Shepard had resigned from the board of directors, effective immediately, to focus on personal matters. The board, with Mrs. Peterson now acting as interim president, formally ratified the dismissal of Mark's violation. The threat of fines and foreclosure vanished as if it had never existed. A few days later, Mrs. Peterson and Dave Miller came to Mark's door. They asked him if he would be willing to chair the new transparency and audit committee he had indirectly helped create. "We need someone who understands the rules, but also believes in fairness," Mrs. Peterson said, "someone methodical." After that presentation, "We all agreed you were the right person for the job." Mark was hesitant at first. The last thing he wanted was to be drawn deeper into HOA politics. But looking at the 2 of them, and thinking of the neighbors who had thanked him, he felt a sense of responsibility. He had exposed a problem. Now he had a chance to help fix it. He agreed. His victory felt complete. He had protected his garden, restored a measure of fairness to his community, and had done so without compromising his principles. He and Lily spent the weekend planting a new set of gardenias, the air free of the tension that had clouded their home for weeks. It was on a rainy Sunday afternoon that the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. He was talking with Dave, who was helping him fix a loose railing on his front porch. "Heard the Shepherds are putting their house on the market," Dave said, tightening a bolt. "Guess Carol couldn't stand living here after being so publicly humiliated. Can't say I blame her. Her husband, Richard, must be furious." The name pricked at Mark's memory. Richard Shepherd, a developer. "What does her husband do?" Mark asked. "Used to be a big-shot project manager for Sterling Developments," Dave replied. "Had a bit of a fall from grace a few years back. Some massive resort project he was heading up out by the lake got torpedoed at the last minute. Cost the company a fortune and cost him a major promotion to vice president. Never really recovered. From what I hear." Sterling Developments, the lake resort project. A cold dread, mingled with an electric sense of understanding, washed over Mark. He thanked Dave, went inside, and headed straight for the archives in his home office. He dug through old boxes of files from his time as a senior partner at his old architectural firm, Jansen, Croft and Associates, before he'd gone freelance after Sarah's death. He found it in a folder labeled Feasibility Studies, 2018. It was a 150-page architectural and environmental review for the Sterling Pinnacle Resort at Heron Lake. His firm had been hired by the primary investors to conduct a final, independent assessment of the project's viability before they released the final round of funding. The lead project manager for Sterling Developments was listed on the first page, Richard Shepherd. Mark flipped to the executive summary, his own words from 5 years ago, staring back at him. His team's review had been professionally brutal and factually unassailable. They had discovered significant structural flaws in the developer's geological surveys, a grossly underestimated budget for wetland mitigation, and a design that was in violation of 3 separate county zoning ordinances. Their conclusion was stark. Proceeding with the project as currently planned would be architecturally unsound, environmentally irresponsible, and financially catastrophic for its investors. The report had killed the project stone dead. It had saved the investors tens of millions of dollars. But it had also single-handedly destroyed Richard Shepherd's flagship project and, with it, his career trajectory. It all clicked into place. The instant hostility, the refusal to compromise, the relentless, obsessive escalation over a handful of stones. It had never been about aesthetic harmony or property values. It had never even been about the garden. It was a deeply personal, long-simmering vendetta. Carol Shepherd knew who he was from the moment he moved in. She had been waiting, patiently, for any small, insignificant infraction, any toe out of line, so she could unleash the full, bureaucratic power of the HOA to exact revenge for the professional humiliation her husband had suffered at the hands of his firm. His small memorial garden was just the pretext she needed. Mark closed the file. The mystery finally solved. His victory felt different now, deeper. He had won not just against a petty tyrant, but against a hidden, bitter grudge. He had fought a battle without ever knowing the real reason it began. He looked out the window at the garden. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the fresh blossoms on the gardenias. The garden was a memorial to his wife, but it had become something more. It was a testament to his own resilience, a symbol of a quiet man who, when pushed too far, used intelligence, procedure, and integrity to protect his home and his principles. The following week, at the first meeting of the new Transparency Committee, Mark's first proposal was not about audits or rules. He proposed a new, community-funded landscaping project to beautify the common area at the entrance to the neighborhood, turning a source of conflict into a source of unity. A way to build something together,